The sun was already high when the sheriff dragged his daughter to the steps of the courthouse. Dust blew across the square, dry and cutting, carrying with it the whispers of neighbors who had gathered without needing to be summoned. Word had spread fast. Sheriff Hale's only daughter had shamed the family. She was with child, and no husband stood beside her. Clara's wrists weren't bound, but the grip her father kept on her arm might as well have been iron shackles. She stared at the ground, boots scuffing the boards as she climbed the steps, every nerve in her body burning under the weight of the townspeople's eyes. The sheriff's voice carried like a gavel. "My blood has been stained by her choice," he said, his hand shaking with anger though his face stayed stiff. "Let all see what comes of sin and disgrace." Clara's throat was dry. She had no words, no chance to explain. She had begged her father in private, begged him not to make a spectacle of her. But pride was a harder master than compassion, and Sheriff Hale had always served pride first. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Women pulled their shawls tighter. Men spat tobacco into the dirt. Someone muttered, "No man'll claim her now." Another whispered, "Better she be sent away." Each word felt like a stone hurled at her back. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she held herself upright, though her body trembled. She thought of the baby inside her, the only piece of warmth she had left. If she fell, if she crumbled here, they would win. The town would break her completely. And then her gaze drifted past the front row of faces. He stood apart, near the edge of the square, where the shade of the livery stable cut across the dust. Elias Boone, the mountain man. His frame was tall, broader than most, but it was the scars that made folks look twice. A ragged line ran from his temple down past his jaw, and his left arm hung stiff at his side, injured years ago in a fight no one dared ask about. He was a figure of unease, a man people whispered about when he walked into town for supplies. Clara had seen him before, passing through, his eyes catching hers only once, quickly, as if even looking at someone for too long might scare them. Now he was watching. His eyes weren't filled with scorn like the others. They weren't curious or cruel. They were steady, dark, unreadable, but steady. Sheriff Hale's voice thundered again. "She will carry the mark of this disgrace until the day she dies. No home under my roof. No protection under my name." The crowd shifted. Some nodded approval. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Clara's tear-filled eyes. She thought of her mother, long gone in the ground, who might have whispered to her to stay strong. But the voice she heard instead was silence. Then came a sound, boots scraping against wood. Elias Boone stepped out of the shade. The crowd hushed. His presence was enough to draw every gaze. He walked slow, his limp obvious, but his head was high. He didn't speak until he reached the steps. "That's enough," he said. His voice was low, rough, but it cut through the square sharper than the sheriff's shout. Sheriff Hale narrowed his eyes. "This is my family's shame, Boone. You've no place here." Elias looked at Clara, only at her, not at the sheriff, not at the crowd. Her. "You shame her, but she's carrying life," he said. "And I see no man here willing to give her a roof, a fire, or a name. If none will, I will." The square erupted. Gasps, curses, laughter, disbelief. "The mountain man?" someone barked. "She's better off in the river," another spat. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to protest, to cry. But no words came. Sheriff Hale's face turned red. "You'd claim her? You, scarred, half-broken, nothing but a drifter? You dare?" Elias didn't flinch. He simply repeated, "I will." The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting had been. People shifted, waiting for Clara's reply, waiting for her to crumble or to refuse. Clara's lips parted. For the first time since her father had dragged her here, she lifted her head high. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I'll go with him. The square fell into stunned silence. Sheriff Hale's hand dropped from her arm as if burned. His own daughter had chosen the scarred outcast over her own blood. He turned away, muttering, "Then you're no daughter of mine." Clara's heart pounded. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself down the steps, each one heavier than the last. Elias Boone moved aside just enough for her to join him. He didn't touch her, didn't reach for her. But his presence was a shield against the eyes burning into her back. Together, they walked away from the square, leaving whispers and stares behind. For the first time that day, Clara felt the faintest spark of something she hadn't expected. Relief. But as they passed the edge of town, her stomach twisted. She had left behind her father, her home, her name. All she had now was the scarred man beside her. And she didn't yet know if he was her salvation, or just another sentence to endure. Clara hadn't spoken since they left the square. The silence stretched between them like the prairie itself. Endless, heavy, demanding. Elias Boone didn't press her. He only kept walking, his limp slowing them but never stopping their steady pace toward the hills. The sun beat down on her shoulders. Dust rose with every step of her boots. Behind them, the town grew smaller, though Clara could still feel its eyes on her back. Every whisper, every sneer, clung to her skin. When they reached the edge of the cottonwoods by the river, Elias finally stopped. He leaned against a trunk, his breath even but strained, his stiff arm held close to his chest. Clara noticed the sweat beading along his temple. The scar down his face glistened in the light, raw and unhidden. "You can still turn back," he said quietly. His voice carried no challenge, only plain fact. "No shame in it. You'll find someplace else. Some relative, maybe." Clara swallowed hard. She had no relatives. No one willing to take her in. Her father had made that clear. "I said I'd go with you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Elias gave a single nod. That was all. They followed the river for miles, the land opening wide to flat grass and scattered rocks. A hawk circled above. The air grew cooler as clouds gathered in the west. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter, one hand resting over her stomach. It wasn't until late afternoon that the unease reached her bones. At first it was the faint echo of hooves, carried by the wind. Then, clearer, the rhythmic pounding of more than one horse. Elias stiffened. He turned his head, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. 3 riders kicking up dust, moving fast. Clara's breath caught. "They're coming after us." "Looks like," Elias muttered. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He only stepped closer to her, shifting his good hand toward the knife strapped at his belt. Her heart raced. "My father sent them." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The riders slowed as they drew near. Dust settled enough for Clara to see their faces. 2 ranch hands she recognized from the saloon, and a third man with a red kerchief covering his mouth. All 3 wore hard expressions, the kind men wore when they thought they had permission. One of them spat into the dirt. "Boone," he drawled, eyes flicking between Elias and Clara. "You picked yourself up some trouble." Elias said nothing. The second man smirked. "Sheriff says the girl ain't yours to take. Hand her over. We'll see she's sent where she belongs." Clara's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream that she wasn't property, that she wasn't theirs to barter. But her throat locked. Elias shifted his stance, planting his boots firm in the soil. "She walks with me," he said simply. The men laughed. The sound was ugly. "You think anyone'll follow you, Boone? You're half crippled. Scarred. Town says you should have died years back." Clara flinched at the words. They cut deep, even though they weren't hers. Elias didn't move. He stood like stone, though his jaw tightened. The third rider, the one with the red kerchief, reached for the rifle across his saddle. "Best move aside, mountain man." Clara's breath came fast. Her hands trembled at her sides. She felt small, powerless, but her voice broke through the fear before she knew it was hers. "I won't go back." The words cracked the air sharper than gunfire. The riders froze. Their eyes turned to her, surprise flickering in their expressions. For a moment even Elias looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her strength for the first time. The man with the rifle lowered it just a fraction. His smirk faltered. "Girl, you don't know what you're saying." "I do," Clara said, her hands steadied against her stomach. "You'll have to kill me before I go back." The silence that followed pressed heavy on the trail. The horses snorted, restless. Elias finally spoke. "You heard her." His hand brushed the handle of his knife. "Now ride." The riders muttered among themselves. One cursed under his breath. They weren't expecting defiance, from her or from him. At last they pulled their reins. With one last glare, they turned and galloped back toward town, dust swallowing them whole. Clara exhaled, the sound shaky. Her knees weakened, but she stayed upright. Elias didn't move closer, didn't offer comfort. He only watched the horizon until the riders were gone. Finally, he said, "You held your ground." Her chest still heaved. "I don't know how long I can." "You held it today," he answered. They walked again, slower now, the sky deepening into dusk. The silence returned, but it felt different. Less like judgment, more like a shield. By nightfall, they reached the base of the hills. Elias led her toward a narrow path, half hidden by cedar trees. "Cabins up there," he said. Clara looked at him, scarred, limping, feared by the town. And yet, when the riders came, he had stood firm without flinching. She realized then that whatever the town saw in Elias Boone, cripple, outcast, savage, she had seen something else in his silence. A man who wouldn't let her be taken. The thought both steadied her and frightened her. Because if she was wrong, she had given herself and her unborn child to the only man the town hated more than her. The cabin came into view just as the last light drained from the sky. It was small, rough-hewn, and dark against the slope of the hills, built from logs stacked without polish, smoke curling faintly from a stone chimney. Clara's boots sank into the damp ground as they climbed the final stretch. She was bone-tired, but her chest stayed tight with unease. This was where she would live now. Elias pushed the door open with his good shoulder. The hinges groaned. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and ash. A single lamp burned low, throwing gold light across a table scarred with knife marks. The hearth glowed with dying embers, not yet tended for night. Clara stepped inside cautiously, her eyes searching. The walls were bare except for a rifle hung above the door and a set of traps leaning in the corner. A simple bedroll lay against one wall, wool blanket folded sharp. There was no sign of softness, no touch of family, just a shelter built for survival. "You can take the bed," Elias said, moving to the hearth. He crouched stiffly, adding wood to the fire with his right hand while his left arm hung useless at his side. "I'll make do on the floor." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't want to take what's yours." He shook his head, not looking at her. "It ain't mine if you need it more." The silence returned. Not the heavy, condemning silence of the town, but a quieter kind. It pressed against her skin, making her aware of every sound, the crackle of the fire, the rasp of his breathing, the thud of her own heart. She lowered herself into the chair by the table. Her hands folded over her stomach without thought. The child shifted inside her, faint but real. She wondered if Elias had noticed. He sat across from her after a while, the firelight cutting across the scar on his face. His eyes were fixed on the flames, not on her. "They call me a savage," he said suddenly, voice low. "They look at this." He touched the scar with his good hand, fingers grazing the ridge that ran from temple to jaw. "And they think it tells the whole story." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to speak. Not like this. What happened? She asked softly. His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, Raid years back. Men came at night. I was the only one to crawl out. Took this scar and a bad arm with me. Town said I should have fought harder, saved more. So I left. Easier to be hated than pitied. The fire cracked. Clara's eyes stung, though she blinked hard to hide it. You lived, she whispered. That's more than most. Elias finally looked at her. His gaze was steady, unreadable. You lived too after what they did today. Takes a kind of strength most don't see. Clara lowered her eyes. I didn't feel strong. I felt ruined. You stood your ground when those riders came, he said. Strength ain't in how you feel. It's in what you do. His words sank into her chest. For the first time since her father had dragged her into the square, she felt the weight of shame shift just a little. The fire grew warmer, filling the small cabin with flickering light. Clara studied Elias in silence. The scars, the stiff arm, the solitude carved into him like the land itself. He was a man the town dismissed, mocked, feared. Yet here he was, offering her a bed, his roof, his name if she wanted it. She realized then that his silence wasn't emptiness. It was protection. Her voice trembled when she spoke again. I don't know if I can raise a child alone. You won't, he said simply. The words settled heavy in the cabin, more binding than any oath spoken before a preacher. Clara felt her chest tighten, not with fear but with something she hadn't expected. Hope, small and fragile. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The storm Elias had seen on the horizon was moving in fast. Clara pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Elias rose stiffly and checked the door latch. Storm'll keep us in a while, he said. Clara nodded, her mind turning over his words again. You won't. For the first time in weeks, she let her hands rest fully on her stomach, not in shame, but in quiet defiance of the world outside that had tried to cast her off. The firelight flickered between them. Neither spoke again, but the silence no longer felt unbearable, felt shared. The storm came in the night. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled through the cracks in the shutters, and thunder rolled so close it rattled the table. Clara lay awake on the bed, staring at the flicker of firelight across the rafters. Sleep would not come. She heard Elias shift on the floor near the hearth. His breathing was steady, but not restful. The storm seemed to reach inside both of them, stirring what they had tried to hold down. By morning, the rain had slowed to a cold drizzle. Mist clung to the trees outside. Clara rose and pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders. The cabin smelled of damp smoke and wet earth. For a moment, it felt like a reprieve, a new beginning. Then the sound came, distant at first, then closer. Hoofs, many of them. Clara froze. Elias was already at the door, knife at his belt, rifle in his good hand. His scarred face was grim, but not surprised. They came quicker than I thought. Clara's chest tightened. My father. Elias nodded once. She stepped to the window. Shapes moved through the mist. Men on horseback, a dozen or more, rifles slung, hats pulled low. At their front, Sheriff Hale sat tall in the saddle, his jaw hard, eyes fixed on the cabin. Clara's breath came shallow. The man who had dragged her into the square now rode to drag her out again. The riders dismounted, boots squelching in the mud. The sheriff called out, his voice carrying through the wet air. Boone, send my daughter out, and this ends clean. Elias didn't answer. He set the rifle across the table, checking the chamber with steady hands. Clara turned to him. You can't fight them all. He looked at her, eyes steady. Not all fights are about winning. Her stomach twisted. Then it's about dying? He shook his head. It's about standing. Sometimes that's enough. The words cut deep because she knew he meant them. The sheriff called again. Clara, come now before worse comes of this. You don't belong in that hovel with a scarred cripple. Clara's heart pounded. The words stung sharper than the rain. Her father's voice, once the law of her world, now felt like chains rattling. Elias moved to the window, watching the men fan out. He muttered, "They'll come whether you choose or not." Clara's hands trembled against the blanket. She thought of the square, of the eyes burning into her, of the whispers. She thought of the child stirring inside her, waiting for her to decide what kind of life it would be born into. Her legs felt weak, but she walked to the door. Elias tried to stop her with a look, but she pushed past him and stepped outside. The drizzle soaked her hair, her shawl clinging heavy to her shoulders. Mud sucked at her boots. All eyes turned to her. The sheriff's face hardened. "Daughter, you've shamed me enough. End this. Come back, and maybe we'll find a way to set it right." Clara's voice shook, but she forced it out. "There's no setting right what you did to me." Gasps rippled through the men. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Careful what you say." She swallowed hard, her hands pressing to her stomach. "You cast me out. You let the town spit on me. You'd see me broken just to keep your name clean." Her eyes lifted, meeting his. "But I won't go back. Not to you. Not ever." Silence. Rain dripped from hats and coats. The sheriff's men shifted uneasily. Elias stepped out beside her then, rifle in hand. His presence was like a wall at her back. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His scarred face and steady stance said enough. The sheriff's hand twitched near his gun. "You'd defy your own blood for him? For that?" Clara's chest heaved. She felt the fear, the shame, the weight of every eye. And then she felt something stronger. "Yes," she said, louder now, clear as the rain. "For him." The words struck like thunder. The sheriff's face twisted, rage breaking through. He raised his hand and rifles lifted around the circle. Elias moved fast, stepping in front of her, rifle leveled. His voice cut cold. "First man who fires dies first." The standoff crackled in the rain. Men glanced at each other, fingers twitching near triggers. Clara's breath caught, waiting for the flash of gunfire that would end it all. Then the sheriff barked, "Stand down!" The rifles lowered, uncertain. The sheriff's glare burned into his daughter, then into Elias. "You've chosen. Don't expect my hand again." He swung onto his horse. With a sharp jerk of the reins, he turned and rode back into the mist. The men followed, one by one, until the sound of hooves faded into silence. Clara stood trembling, rain dripping down her face, heart hammering. She expected Elias to lower his rifle. Instead, he stayed there, steady until the last echo was gone. Only then did he turn to her. His eyes searched hers, unreadable, scarred face wet with rain. "You stood," he said quietly. Clara's knees gave way, and she sank into the mud. Not from weakness, but from release. For the first time, she had chosen her own path, and spoken it aloud. Elias bent to lift her, his good hand steady on her arm. "Come inside. Fire's waiting." As they stepped back into the cabin, Clara realized the storm outside had broken, but the storm within her had finally begun to calm. The days after the standoff passed in a strange quiet. The storm had broken, leaving the hills slick with mud and the river running fast. The air smelled of cedar and damp earth. For the first time in weeks, Clara woke each morning without the dread of footsteps outside her door. The town had not returned. Whispers, yes, Elias went for supplies and heard them, felt the eyes burn into his back, but no riders came up the hill. The sheriff's men had drawn their line, and Clara had drawn hers. Inside the cabin, life pressed on. Elias worked with his one good hand, slower than most, but steady. He fetched wood, set traps, boiled water. Clara tended the fire, mended his torn shirts, tried to keep her shaking hands from betraying the weight still inside her. The child grew restless, shifting beneath her skin. Each movement reminded her of what she had chosen, and what she could not undo. One afternoon, while the wind rattled the shutters, Clara watched Elias carry a length of cedar into the cabin. He set it on the table with care. His eyes met hers briefly, then he sat, pulling a knife from his belt. The blade caught the firelight as he began to carve. "What are you making?" Clara asked, her voice soft. He didn't look up. "Cradle." The word struck her chest like a bell. She drew closer, watching shavings curl onto the table. The knife moved slow, careful. His scarred hand guided each cut as though the wood demanded patience. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I do," he said simply. The silence that followed was different than any they had shared before. It wasn't heavy, wasn't suffocating. It was the sound of something being built. Clara sank into the chair opposite him. Her eyes fixed on the shape forming in the cedar, the curve of a frame, the suggestion of a place for a child to rest. She thought of the square, of her father's voice booming out her shame. She thought of the riders, rifles raised in the rain. And she thought of Elias, standing between her and the world, scarred but unflinching. Her voice shook. "Why?" Elias paused, looking up at her at last. His dark eyes held no hesitation. "Because a child needs more than walls and fire. Needs to know it was wanted." Clara's throat closed. Tears burned at her eyes, hot and sharp. She looked away, pressing her hands to her stomach. "I was never wanted. Not really. My father cared more for his name than for me." The knife scraped gently against the wood. "Then let this one know different." The words broke her. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed a hand to her mouth, but Elias didn't look away. He only kept carving, slow and steady, as though each cut was a promise. By nightfall, the frame was rough but whole. Elias set the knife down, flexing his stiff hand with effort. Clara touched the cradle lightly, her fingers brushing the smooth curve of cedar. The wood smelled fresh, alive. Her chest tightened. "It's real." Elias gave a single nod. "So's what comes next." That night, she sat by the fire, watching the flames dance against the carved frame. The cabin no longer felt like a hovel or a cage. Felt like a beginning. The following week, whispers reached even the hills. Neighbors passing Elias on the trail no longer spat. Some nodded stiffly, some looked away, but the air had shifted. The sheriff himself did not return. Pride had sent him once. Pride kept him away now. Clara walked through the small clearing near the cabin, shawl tight against the cold. The sky was clear, stars sharp against the black. She felt the child stir again, strong this time, and instead of fear she felt the faintest rise of strength within her. She turned toward the cabin. Through the window she saw Elias tending the fire, his frame outlined by the glow. The cradle rested near the hearth, waiting. Clara stepped inside. Elias looked up, scar catching the firelight, his expression unreadable but steady as always. She crossed the room, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. She placed her hand on the cedar cradle, then met his eyes. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, as if the words weren't needed. But she saw the flicker in his eyes. The silence between them had shifted into something shared, something whole. Clara sat beside the fire. The warmth wrapped around her. The child shifted again, and for the first time she smiled. Outside, the wind swept across the hills, carrying whispers back toward town. But in the cabin, there was no shame, no judgment. Only firelight, cedar, and a cradle waiting to be filled. Clara had been cast out, shamed, betrayed by blood. But in the scarred silence of a wounded mountain man, she had found something no court or sheriff could strip away. Not forgiveness, not reputation, place to begin again.